What's going on, guys? This is DJ Chimney Sparrow with a patch to help you train your ears by spotting different places in the frequency spectrum where sound is boosted or attenuated. That'll help you pick up the nuances of music so that you can make better recording or mixing decisions. So this patch was inspired by David Moulton's ear training program, the Golden Ears program. Love his stuff. I've been working on the first couple of CDs, which, like this patch, boosts and attenuates different frequencies. But I wanted to create something that was truly random, so the answers are different each time. And you can drop in any song you like into this patch and practice with it so you can get better working with your favorite genres. So if you like what you're going to see today, you can always like and subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. So the first thing that I should mention is if you are working with a DAW other than Ableton, there's three things that you need if you want to emulate this. So the most important is an effects rack that can be linked to a zone selector. And if you don't know what that means, just sit tight, I'll explain in a few minutes. Also a parametric EQ and an envelope shaper. And the envelope shaper is what's going to automate the boosting or attenuating of the signal. So let's get to it here. I'm going to show you what the patch actually looks like when it's finished. So you can see at the bottom here we've got 10 chains, well 20 chains. And so we have the first 10 are being boosted by different frequency ranges and the rest are being cut. So what happens here is there is a randomization that happens in which this zone selector at the top here will pick something between 1 and 20, and the corresponding chain will activate, which means that we will get a boosting or attenuating of the EQ at a specific frequency, and that will happen because it's being automated by our shaper. So let's get to it. I'm going to delete this patch, and we're going to start off with a single audio track. So let us drop in an EQ and a shaper. We only need 1 point in the EQ, so I'll remove these other points. Now we're going to highlight the tab of the remaining point and enter 31 Hertz. So that corresponds roughly to B flat or C on the lowest octave on the piano. So it's the lowest octave that we as humans can hear. Next, we're going to adjust our Q value. So if I boost this signal up and increase the Q value, you'll see we get a very narrow, like a notch filter bandwidth happening. If I decrease it, it gets very wide. I like to set it to 0.5. Just makes it a little easier to hear what's being done to the sound. Then over by the shaper, we're going to get rid of this pattern here. Actually, I'm going to bring the gain back down to 0. I'm going to increase the grid size to 16. And I'm going to draw in 6 points on our grid here. So I'll put 2 in the corners. Then I'll move 3 bars in, make 2 more. And then 2 bars in from there, and these next 2 will be at the top. So this is going to control when and for how long a signal is boosted or attenuated, so you can adjust this according to what you like. All right, so now we're going to map this by clicking the map button to the gain on our EQ point. And now you can see we're getting a lot of movement here. We want to slow that down. Let's change the rate to 6. So this will happen over about 3/4 of a bar. If you feel like it's still going too fast, you can always adjust the master tempo up here. At least I think that's what it's linked to. Now we're going to change the depth to 40% and the offset to 40%. So that should start us off at 0 dB. Then it will boost up to 12 dB. And then after a few seconds, it'll drop back down to 0 dB. Okay, so now we need to connect these plugins to an effects rack. So I'm going to hold Shift and click the top to highlight both of these. You can either right click now and go to Group, or you can just hit Command G, and that will introduce some new controls on the left-hand side. Click the button that has 3 lines on it, and we're going to rename this chain to Boost 31 Hertz. We're going to create, we're going to be working with 10 octaves, 10 chains total. So you can either right click and go to duplicate, but again, that is kind of slow. So I'm going to make sure this bottom one is highlighted and hit Command D until we have 10. Okay, I'm going to go to the second chain from the top here and rename it to 63 Hertz. That's 1 octave higher than our 31 Hertz. And I'm going to change the frequency knob for that chain to 63 as well. And now you can see that the new frequency range is the one being boosted. So I'm going to go through each of the chains now. I'm going to put the values, I'm going to change them to up on the screen. But these are each 1 octave apart from each other. So you can go ahead and pause the video at this point and make those adjustments, and I'll catch up to you in a second. So now we've renamed each of our chains, and if I scroll down, you can see that at each point it's been moved over to the corresponding frequency. Okay, so now we need to make sure that each of these chains is going to activate separately from the others. Because right now, if I put a track in and press play, these are all going to boost at once, and that's going to be very noisy. One point about this, actually, if you're working with a song that doesn't have a lot of headroom in it, and it gets boosted, you might get some clipping and distortion. So it's a good idea to turn the channel fader down to -12, just to be safe. Okay, so you can see at the top we have this hide and chain button. It's hidden by default. Click chain, and you can see we have this grid here with the chain selector at the top. So the way this works is this highlight part will be at a certain value, and any chain that has a range that's within that value will activate. So if nothing's in there, nothing will activate. If they're all in there, they'll all activate. So I'm going to set the first chain at 1, second chain at 2, third one at 3, and so on, all the way up to 10. And while I'm doing this, just a little side note, if you wanted to, you could make them cover like a wider range. So you could say, well, the first chain is going to be between 1 and 5, the second chain will be between 6 and 10, and so on. And that can make it a little easier to spot when you're trying to figure out your answers later on. I'm just going to do 1 to 1 though, because it's just a little easier to see. So we're going to right click the top part of our grid here and go to Map to Macro 1. That opens this new box here. We can close and open that again by pressing this button in the upper left corner of the clip view. And we only need this one that's been labeled to the chain selector. So we're going to hit the minus button to get rid of these other macro knobs. Okay, so at the moment, well actually first of all, you can see we have a randomization button that has appeared up here. So this is how I like to randomize which chain is going to be turned on. I've tried mapping the chain selector to an LFO tool with a randomization feature on it, but using Ableton's plugins I found didn't work so well. One of the plugins tends to prefer low values over higher ones. Another one wouldn't re-trigger when I press play, so sometimes the signal would come in already boosted or attenuated. It just made it very confusing. I like the randomization button, but the one thing to be aware of, especially if you're used to using the golden ears, is it will sometimes choose the same answer more than once. So don't expect just because it boosts at, say, 4 kilohertz, that it won't boost at 4 kilohertz a second time in a row. Okay, so right now if I click the randomization button, it will choose randomly any value between 0 and 127. So we want to limit that to between 1 and 10. So I'm right-clicking the chain selector, and I'm going to go up to Edit Macro Map. And we have a new box that's appeared at the top that says Chain Selector, and here's the minimum and maximum values. Change the minimum to 1 and the maximum to 10. We'll go back down here, right click, go back to the macro map to close that. And now if I hit random, you can see it's staying within that 1 to 10 range. So let's be clear about what's happening here. So I press the randomization button. That randomizes the macro knob, which, if I had other macro knobs here, they would also be randomized. The knob influences what value the chain selector is at. So in this case, it's set to the 9th chain. So that would be a boost of 8 kilohertz. And you can see that it would automate that boost. Now the only problem is when I click the random button, we can see the answer just below. And we could try like covering the screen with our arm, but that gets a little silly. So instead, let's map this random button to a key on our keyboard. So you can either do this by right-clicking and going to Edit Key Map. You can press the key button in the top corner, or you can just hit Command K, which is the fastest. Click the randomization button. And now the next key I enter on my keyboard is going to be automatically mapped to the randomization button. So I'm going to pick a key I don't normally use. I'm going to choose the squiggly button just to the left of my number 1 on the keyboard. And now you can see that symbol has appeared beside the random button, and it's also appeared in this top corner as well. Okay, we're going to hit Command K to exit. And now I don't even have to press the random button. I can just hit the squiggle line. I don't know what it's actually called. And you can see it's randomizing it for me. So now I can close this box, and I no longer can see what the answers will be. So I have to rely on my ears now to get the right answer. Okay, so now we're ready to try this out and see if we can tell what's being done to the sound. I'm not going to put music in here for copyright reasons, but I'm going to add some pink noise instead. And you can easily find pink noise for free online. Pink noise is great for practicing, especially if you're new to ear training, because it plays all frequencies of sound at the same intensity. That makes it easier for you to tell what's being done to the sound. Music can be a little harder. Okay, so I'm going to randomize our chain selector. And now let's see if we can hear what's being done to the sound. Okay, so that sounded to me like a boost at 1 kilohertz. Let's make sure. Double click to open it up. I can see the 6th chain has been selected. I can also scroll down, see where the highlighted part of the chain selector lines up. Looks like it lines up with this one, which matches up with a boost of 1 kilohertz. Let's do it again. Randomize. I think that was a boost at 500 hertz. Let's click to be sure. Okay, that was chain number 5, which corresponds with 500 hertz. Okay, so this works when we are boosting the signal. What if we also want to have options to cut or attenuate the signal? For that, we're going to need another 10 chains. So we'll highlight the top chain, hold Shift, and click the bottom chain to highlight them all. And now I'm just going to hit Command D to duplicate them all. We'll just give it a second while it thinks about it. And the new chains have been added at the bottom. Click the first new chain and rename this to Cut. Then we'll move over to our shaper. And we're going to invert this envelope. So the points that are at the bottom, we're going to bring up to the top. Points to the top, we'll bring down to the bottom. And we're going to change our offset from positive 40% to negative 40%. And now it will start at 0 dB, it will attenuate or cut down to 12 dB, and then after a few seconds, it should go back up to 0 again. All right, so I'm going to rename and make those adjustments with each of our new chains, so you can do the same thing, and I'll see you in just a second. All right, so we have now renamed all of our chains, and if I scroll over here and go down, just wait for it to drop. There we go. So yeah, you can see we've attenuated at each of the 10 frequencies. Okay, so now we need to make sure that the new chains each have their own zones, because right now they have the same zones as the ones that are boosting. So we're going to take our first cut chain, move it over to 11. The next one will move to 12, and so on all the way to 20. Now the last thing we need to do is increase the range of the macro knob so that it will include our 10 new chains. So I'll right click, go back to macro map. We'll increase the maximum value here from 10 to 20. Now actually a quick note about this. Let's say you don't want to have to choose between 20 options if you're just getting started. Maybe you only want to practice with the first 5 octaves and you want to see if you can tell they've been boosted or not. So you would keep the minimum at 1, but change the maximum value to 5. So you know that you're only going to be dealing with these first 5 chains and they will be boosted. Or maybe you want to work on all 10 octaves, but you're specifically working on telling which frequencies have been cut. You would change the minimum to 11. Let's see if this works. Okay, it didn't get mad at me. We'll change the maximum to 20. So that would give us from 11, which is our first chain that cuts the frequency, all the way up to 16. So we're getting the full range of attenuation there. We're going to try with everything. So we're going to start minimum of 1, maximum of 20. Right click at the bottom here to exit the macro map. You might not always get that exit macro map option, by the way. Like if I click here, you can't, it's not an option. So I like to click the chain selector. That's where it appears. Okay, so now if I hit the randomization key on my keyboard, we can see that it's now including values between 10 or 11 and 20. So let's close this up again. And we'll practice this with our 10 new chains as well. All right, so I'm randomizing it, and here we go. Okay, so you might not have been able to hear that because it was a very high frequency. I believe that was a boost at 16 kilohertz. So it kind of depends a bit on how good your monitors are and how good your ears are. Let's confirm that. So open it up, and it was the 10th chain. And again, if we scroll down, looking at this highlight part, that's the value the chain selector is at. It lines up with our boost at 16 kilohertz. Let's close it up. Let's see if we can get one where it's cut this time. Randomize it. Okay, I believe that was a boost at 31 hertz. Again, very hard to hear, but you might kind of feel that as like a rumble. Oh, you know what? I was off. So that was a cut at 63 hertz. You know what? I think it might have accidentally come in where it was already cut. That's why it was a little hard to hear. Let's press play again and see if we can tell. Okay. Yeah, okay, that was a little bit more obvious. Okay, so yeah, sometimes it will cut in with the signal already boosted, or attenuated. So yeah, you might have to replay it once just to be sure. That doesn't happen too often though. Okay, so let me wrap up by giving a suggestion on practicing. So I like to randomize or guess 10 times in a row without checking my answers. So that helps me get better at sort of memorizing what different frequencies sound like when they're boosted or attenuated, rather than constantly checking to get that reference point. And that just allows me to work faster and be able to not need to check all the time when I'm mixing, for example. So let's say I've randomized a bunch of times to guess. So I'm just going to hit the randomization button a bunch of times. Okay, and then when I'm done, I can open up the plugins and check my answers. So this would be, for example, the answer to my 10th guess. Now, if I wanted to check the guesses before, I can hit Command Z, I think it's Alt Z for PCs, and that will go back to the previous selection. It will undo. So this would be the answer to my 9th guess. This is the answer to my 8th guess, and so on, all the way back to 1. So you can check your answers in reverse. So I hope you found that helpful. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to see more, you can always like and subscribe to the channel. I like to post stuff about songs that I find inspirational, as well as, well, hopefully there'll be more instructional videos coming down the line in the future. You can also check out my blog where I write about my personal philosophy, as well as different things I learn as I get deeper into the world of music production. But thanks again for watching. I am DJ Chimney Sparrow, and you guys stay safe.